Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I appreciate you joining our town hall. We've been doing these over the last, maybe 5 or 6 weeks. Last week we had a conflict and we're unable to do it, but really appreciate y'all joining us. And we've got Congressman Bruce Westerman here with us. Thank you, Congressman, for being with us.
Good to be with you, Tim. Appreciate you doing this and letting me be a part of it tonight.
Well, thank you very much. I thought what we would do is just jump right in, and just as a little background, Congressman Westerman and I did not get to serve together when I was in Congress. So I got elected lieutenant governor, thank you to the voters, in 2014. And I believe, Congressman Westerman, that's when you got elected to Congress, representing the 4th District, 2014. Is that correct?
That's correct. I went in as you were going out, but you are the legend there in Congress. Some of your classmates, they still ask about you, and we have to protect the magnetic razorback that you left up in the gym up there, because
yes,
people try to.
It is still there.
Protect it, yeah.
Well, so just so everyone will know, you have a really large, you're one of 4 congressional districts, and it's the district that previously was represented by now Senator Tom Cotton. And maybe you can give me, I don't know it as perfectly as you do, but goes from all the way over in South Arkansas, almost in Mississippi, and goes all the way up to Fayetteville. And
yeah,
is that all the way over to Texarkana and up to Fayetteville? Is that a good description?
Yeah, I've described it several times, but everything on the Louisiana border except for Chico County, everything that borders Texas, all the way up along Oklahoma to just south of Fort Smith, and it juts in and goes up and takes in part of Crawford, Franklin, and Madison County. So it's one county shy of Missouri, then back down to Clarksville, Dardanelle, Hot Springs, Pine Bluff. So it's 33, all are parts of 33 counties. So geographically, it's a large rural district, and great people that I get to represent, a great part of the state. I mean, all of Arkansas is great. You get the benefit of being a voice for the whole state, and you're doing a great job at that. And I feel like I'm covering the whole state, because from my home, I could be just about anywhere in the state with the time that it takes me to get to the furthest points of my district. And I live in Hot Springs.
So we have 75 counties, and 33 of them, at least part of those counties, are in your district. And when you look at the folks you represent some of the Delta, you represent the timber country where I grew up, and you represent the River Valley. I mean, all the way up to Northwest Arkansas, and going over to North Central a little bit. So you've got a good mix of just about everybody here in the state. So the first thing I'd like for you to comment on is, with all of those different parts of the state represented and the diversity of constituents that you have, what are you hearing from your constituents about the impact of COVID-19 as it relates to health, what you're seeing in your hospitals in your district, but also after you talk a little bit about the health impact, if you can talk about the economic impact and what you're seeing there, and maybe how the federal legislation that y'all have passed over the last month and a half has impacted folks. So you just want to tell us a little bit about what's going on in the middle of this really strange pandemic time that we're in.
Yeah, well, the 4th District of Arkansas is a real good representation of rural America. Last check, could have changed today. I didn't check it today, but last check, I've still got 2 counties, Little River County and Calhoun County, who have no cases of of COVID-19.
Hmm.
A lot of counties that have very few cases. A couple of weeks ago, or last week, I think it was, I had only 4 counties that had over 40 cases in those counties. But everybody's been good to do the social distancing. We're blessed to be in a rural part of America with a pandemic outbreak like this, but it's really taken a toll on businesses. And what I'm hearing from people is they're ready to get back to work. They want to follow guidelines. They want a good set of guidelines and rules to follow, but people understand we can't go on like this, and we have to get back to work. It's counterintuitive. You would think that if any business would be doing well during a pandemic, it would be hospitals and healthcare, but they're getting hit as hard as, or harder than some, because they're staying open, they're staying staffed, and up until recently, they were only seeing patients that were emergencies or COVID-19 patients. So we've seen a real negative impact on rural hospitals. We've seen a negative impact on doctor's office, dentist office. It's really across the board, the devastation that's happened to the economy because of this pandemic. And, Tim, I was just on a GOP conference call. You remember being in Congress, and you would go to a conference where you would, hear kind of the game plan and what's going on. And, they were talking about this bill that Pelosi introduced today, $3 trillion, everything in there from changing voter laws to providing additional funding for unemployment to run through January or even later of next year. And it's really unfortunate that we're in that predicament. The bill that was passed, the CARES Act, and then the addition to it, put a lot of money out there through the Paycheck Protection Program to help small businesses. It gave money to states, and we haven't even seen that money fully dispersed yet. And now we see a 100% partisan right down the line bill that the speaker's trying to push. I'll be going to DC Friday to vote on it. And she's also putting a bill out there that will require or will allow proxy voting. So that'll pass the House because she's pushing it and she's got the votes, which could mean that they won't even call us back for votes anymore. So we've got some fundamental problems there. Getting this first couple of packages of the CARES Act implemented, and then seeing more money trying to be pushed into the system. We've got to focus on getting the economy back up and running, keeping people safe, and doing the things to allow the economy to start back up and grow, not just shoving more federal money down the tube.
So you've mentioned several things I want to follow up on. First on the change in voting, where you'd be able to vote from home, and I know Speaker Pelosi's pushing this, and she can do that. That would be a rules change, right? Not a law change. Or is that?
That would be a rules change, but some people think there's constitutional implications there.
Yeah, I think
probably.
Yeah, there may be. Yeah.
And I mean, if you can't serve in Congress, if you can't do the job, then maybe it's time to get out and let somebody else take that position that can do the job. I agree. I mean, this is part of the fabric of our country. We send our military personnel into dangerous situations. We've seen our doctors and nurses and emergency workers dealing with this pandemic. At some point, Congress has to go back to DC and do our job. And I think we can do it in a safe manner where we're, wearing the protective gear, doing the social distancing, meet in large rooms. But we can't just throw the rules out the window and start passing massive bills with no debate. I mean, there's no need to have anybody but the speaker if that's what you're going to do.
Well, and how are you going to encourage folks around the country to get back to business if members of Congress won't even go to Washington? So no, I agree with you on that. I want to follow up on a couple other things, and then we're going to get to questions. I want to remind folks, if you'll ask questions on Facebook, we've got staff looking over those, and they're going to be texting me. So if I look down, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to be looking at those questions. But I want to cover a few things. on the issue of hospitals and healthcare. And by the way, Thursday night at 6, we're going to have a lot of hospital administrators and CEOs come on and talk about what they're seeing. We've got folks from all over the representing hospitals all over the state. But one of the reasons that I have heard and read that hospitals are having a difficult time is a lot of people who need care are not going in to hospitals because they're scared of COVID. And obviously, that's bad for the patient. Some people I have read have died because they needed to go to the hospital, but they're so worried about COVID-19 that they avoided getting the care they needed. Now, it's one thing if it's completely elective, like plastic surgery or something. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about life or death health situations. So you've had that issue, and I know we had a prohibition on elective procedures for a while in a lot of hospitals. That's where they make significant money, and that during that period, I know there were layoffs at some of the hospitals. Um, the problem that we've seen in rural areas, and if you could comment on this, is they can't just turn the faucet back on now. Some of them are worried about survival and they don't have a lot of reserve built up, et cetera. So some of these rural hospitals that were on the edge of going out anyway are now possibly going to face financial ruin. Do you have any comment on that? Have you heard stories of that around the state?
Yeah, that's a great topic to bring up. And I think it's starting to highlight and really shine a magnifying glass on a problem that we're going to see when the rest of the economy starts cranking back up, and that's consumer confidence. And you think about going to a hospital where there possibly could be COVID cases there. People are weighing that decision out. Is this surgery or this procedure essential enough that I'm going to take the chance of going into a hospital and getting an infection? It's the same question people will be asking about going to restaurants, going back to other businesses. But we're seeing it, I think, first play out here with the hospitals. And we did have a lot of funds in the CARES Act, the last round of funding. We had like $75 billion for hospitals, with the focus of that on rural hospitals. There was funding in the first part of the CARES Act to go to hospitals. So it's not like we haven't put money out there, but the real solution is to get people, back into their routines, back going to see the doctor and back going into the hospital for those services that they need, because they're getting those services for a reason. So you're creating health issues as well if people aren't going to the hospitals. And the federal government's tried to be flexible on that. They allowed ambulatory surgery centers to do procedures that usually could only be done in hospitals. That's yet to be implemented here in Arkansas. But I think anything that would help get patients' confidence back, so they would go back to the hospitals, go back to the outpatient centers, go back to the ambulatory surgery centers, and have those procedures done. That's just kind of the start of what I think we're going to have to see across the economy for the recovery to take place.
Yeah, on the ambulatory surgery centers, it seems to me these are basically, I'm not a healthcare professional, obviously, but for just from a simple perspective, these are places where you can have day surgery and be at home that night. And there's a lot of them around. And it seems to me that what the feds did, what the federal government did, is providing some equality in terms of the payments they get. It's a good thing because it provides an option for people where there's, in many cases, a better chance of a COVID-free environment, but that has not been implemented here yet. And
right, and it's not allowing new procedures in the ASCs, ambulatory surgery centers. It's just allowing like patients who have Medicare who currently have to have those procedures done in the hospital or hospital outpatient to get them done in an ASC. But again, the
Hopefully
state
we'll
hasn't
get that.
implemented that.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get that implemented. One of the things I want to mention before we go to questions, we've already got some good questions. China has been in the news a lot for a lot of different reasons. Before the pandemic, it was all the civil rights violations, human rights abuses that were going on in China, but the civil rights violations in Hong Kong. And I think early this morning, our time, yesterday in Hong Kong, there were more instances of that, rounding up pro-democracy demonstrators. I think I saw that pop across my phone when I woke up early this morning. So they've been in the news for a lot of different reasons. The pandemic has put them front and center. I've been concerned as a military officer for 24 years. And as a graduate at the War College, I've been concerned about China because of all that I've learned about China over the years. If you hear some loud noises back there, it's my 2-year-old who's testing out her vocal cords, and they apparently are working excellently. In any event, China, we're going to have to do trade with China. The president's all for trade with China, fair trade, obviously, but we need to tread lightly and have our eyes wide open when we're having any sort of dealings with China. And I know you're aware of this. I've got it in my hand here. There's one thing I wanted to mention. I've got this speech, I've mentioned it before, that Secretary Pompeo gave to governors in February about China and all the things that China does here in the United States to infiltrate our organizations and institutions and to get access. And there was something in the news. Won't get into all the details because there are a lot of facts we don't know yet. But there was something in the news yesterday. I think you saw. We talked about it last night, and that was the charges against this University of Arkansas professor who's been charged with wire fraud, federal charges. And the allegation is that he has had dealings, including financial dealings, with a lot of academics in China that he didn't disclose. And apparently there's some evidence in some of the legal documents indicating that he knew he needed to disclose some of the relationships he had with China. And it sort of reminded me of something that Pompeo had pointed out in the speech. And I wanted to read this and get your take on this. But he was talking about in the speech the academic, the influence in the academic community, and the fact that here's one. Texas. This is from his speech. This is Secretary of State Pompeo, President Trump's Secretary of State, speaking to all the governors at the National Governors Association in February. But he talks about how a Texas A&M investigation discovered more than 100 academics there participating in Chinese talent recruitment plans, and only 5 of them had declared they were participating. And there's just lots of evidence of Chinese influence in universities across the country. And I don't mean Chinese influence in a good way. It's something that we've got to be very well aware of, and cautious about. And I want to read this quote and have you comment on it. It says, here's the lesson. This is Secretary Pompeo, quote, "So here's the lesson. The lesson is that competition with China is not just a federal issue. It's happening in your states with consequences for our foreign policy, for the citizens that reside in your states, and indeed for each of you." And he goes on to say, it doesn't mean we can't do business with China. And to the point I made, we just got to have eyes wide open and know that they're not our buddies and they're not our longtime allies and they don't share our values. Um, so I wanted to get your take on that. I know this is a big topic in the Congress and the subject of a lot of legislation. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective on China and what you've learned working in Congress?
Yeah, and Tim, we could do 2 hours talking about this. It's such a broad subject. It's something that I've been seeing literally since I got into Congress. You know, was seeing some of this before, but it's really been an eye-opening experience to me that you travel around the world and the Communist Party of China is there doing something. Now, I've got a lot of Chinese friends. Chinese people are good people. The Communist Party in China is not good. It's a communist dictatorship that tries to pass itself off as something else. You're talking about what's happening in Hong Kong. Last August, I was over in Tokyo at a conference speaking there, and our friend Matt Schlapp was there, Sarah Carter was there, and that's when a lot of the stuff was happening there in Hong Kong. And they left the conference and went over to Hong Kong, and they told me later that it was it was really terrible what was happening in Hong Kong with the Chinese police officers that were there and all the propaganda and everything that was going on. You travel, go anywhere in the world on a major shipping lane, on a canal, on ports. There's a massive Chinese influence there. They have a goal, a publicly stated goal. They call it One Belt, One Road. They want to return to be the world's dominant economic superpower. And they see us as a path to that and also as a threat to them getting that. They do things and they don't play fair. Then the number one thing you can count on is they're not playing fair. When we have a business in the United States and that business wants to grow or gain more market share, they look at their cost of doing business, and usually those high costs are resources and labor and intellectual property and all those things that you count as a cost here. Well, the Chinese don't play fair on any of those. They hoard resources around the world. These smartphones, 62 critical rare earth minerals in those phones. You just about can't buy one except through China because they've gone around the world and they control the mining, they control the supply chain on it. And they do that in every industry, and they try to buy market share. So where we buy natural resources on an open market, they hoard natural resources and the government pushes it into their businesses to lower their costs. Where we have labor costs and certain safety expectations, the Chinese government, it's basically no labor costs compared to what we have here. So they control all the inputs, resources, labor. We spend dollars on research and technology. They steal it and use it in their facilities. And they don't play by the same rules that we play by. And we can't continue just keep giving them everything and buying everything they send here. So there's going to be a big move in Congress to work on the supply chains and get more stuff back here made in America. We've seen it with pharmaceuticals, with personal protective equipment, where we're so reliant on the Chinese that we really can't afford to be in that situation anymore. So I think you're going to see a big move in the federal government to try to do what the president actually campaigned on, was onshoring manufacturing, onshoring businesses. And if you can't bring it back to America, at least bring it back to a consistent ally, somebody you can trust and that you can work with. We used to make a lot of medical equipment and pharmaceuticals in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is having horrible economic problems, yet we've shipped all that manufacturing over to China now. There's things we can do to get control of our destination again.
You make a really good point. Obviously, our first priority is to bring a lot of that manufacturing back. That's going to have to be done to a large degree, except in specific national security related areas. That's going to have to be done by the private sector. The private sector will make those decisions. They're free to do that. and hopefully they will find a way. I believe they can find a way in many instances to make those goods, those essential goods, back here in the United States. But you make a really good point. To the extent companies need to be physically in Asia because it's in their economic interest to be over there, they're providing goods and services to countries in Asia. To the extent they need to do that, I have made it clear that in several different forums that we need to encourage businesses to look outside of China. If an American company is doing well, making something and selling it in Asia, and they feel like they need to be in Asia, there are a lot of Asian countries that are our allies, other than China. And I think you're already seeing some of that happen. But the broader point that I think you make, and President Trump has talked about this, is that this pandemic has sort of pressure tested our supply chain pipeline, if you will. And we see where the weaknesses are. A lot of our critical products, items that we have to have during an emergency are made in China. So one of our greatest competitor, an adversary in many ways, if you look at their military activity in the South China Sea, their manipulation of currency, et cetera, we should not be relying on our adversary, our greatest competitor, for the type of items that we need in an emergency, and pharmaceuticals to be included there. And I think you're right. I've already seen a lot of the legislation that's been introduced on some of these things, but this is common sense. Readiness, if you're in the military or whatever, you are preparing for emergencies or military action or whatever. You got to have certain things. You don't want to be reliant on outside sources. In fact, the military has to comply with federal law that requires our uniforms, for example, and other materials to be made here. And so we do need to, certainly the private sector's got to have the freedom to do what they need to do around the world to trade and be free. But we also have to have a good dose of common sense when we're thinking about these issues, and not just rush into China with everything we've got.
Yeah, that's and that supply chain is going to be looked at with gone through with a fine tooth comb to try to get incentives out there and get made in America back to where it means something. And a lot of the constituents I've talked to told me they're looking at labels already. And I was just thinking as you were talking about the supply chain, the N95 mask that we all learned about through this pandemic, that material that's used in that's made by 3M, guess where all of that material is made? Because we had cut and sew lines here in the 4th District and across the country that were ready to make masks, ready to make gowns, but you couldn't get the material that went into the process to make them. So, I mean, a lot of people are making the cloth mask, which, it doesn't have the same filtering capacity of the N95s, but even just the basic raw material inputs, the Chinese were controlling all of that.
Yeah. That is something that's going to demand our attention, and we're going to be talking about for some time. And I will say this is an area where a lot of Democrats and Republicans agree. They agree. You can find a lot of common ground on this issue. I want to jump to some questions here. We've got several, and we'll try to just run through them as quickly as we can. Joshua from Melbourne asks, is it safe to reopen? Why aren't government offices doing it if it is safe to reopen? And I'll say something about that, then kick it over to you, Bruce. First of all, my office has been operating and open since, well, we never stopped operating. my staff and we work from afar most of the time, but we have the calls forwarded, et cetera. And, you know, a lot of government offices are doing that. It sounds to me like in his area, there are some government offices not doing that. But the one thing I would emphasize is we've got to continue to follow the guidelines. It's like I told my wife had to run out to pick something up today. And I reminded her that the virus didn't go away overnight. Just because people feel more comfortable doesn't mean that the virus disappeared. We've got to continue to use common sense. She wore a mask, social distancing, lots of hand sanitizer. So, you know, I guess you want to speak to the reopening. I think in his instance, it sounds like a government office is not open. I don't know which one that is, but you are going to see more things opening up if they're not open, but we got to follow these guidelines. Bruce, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and the same thing, my office has stayed open, a lot of remote work. The only time we have people going in the office in DC is when I'm up there for a vote, or if somebody has to run in and do something there. We've got some district offices that people are working from home, but my office in Hot Springs we've had at least one person going in there answering the phones, and everybody else, you know, working from home. We do the Zoom sessions, a lot of conference calls, but I think, you know, Congress again has to lead on this and show that we can do it safely, and people have to not let their guard down. I think we've made tremendous sacrifice with the social distancing, with all the self-imposed damage to the economy that we've done. We would hate to go backwards from that. So as the guidelines are put out and you get out and about, please follow those guidelines. Wash your hands, keep the distance, you know, wear a mask where you need to wear a mask. I went out and got a haircut for the first time in a couple of months the other day, and I wore my mask the whole time I was in getting my haircut. It feels awkward.
It looks good. It looks good,
yeah.
Bruce. Hey, mine, see this? The Army would kick me out if I showed up with this, but my wife is applauding the lack of a haircut. But Army time is approaching soon, so I'll have to get one as well. But so you wore a mask while you got your haircut?
Yep. Yeah, I had to take it off with one ear and hold it while they cut around it. So it's not what you're used to. Who would have ever thought we would have to do that? But you know, we've all got to do our part. And you know, the best way I heard this described is we want to crawl, walk, and run. As we start opening things up, you know, everything's focusing on what's happening. So we really don't want to see a spike in the numbers as we open up, and that's dependent on people following the hand hygiene, you know, not touching your hands to your face, social distancing, wearing the mask, which from my understanding, that only helps to not spread it if you got it, but sometimes you can have COVID-19 and not know it. So it's just an extra layer of protection. But we've got essential workers that have been out there operating, you know, in healthcare, in utilities, in agriculture and food processing and trucking, you know, all those different industries. They've been working the whole time, and thank the Lord for that, because they've been taking care of the things that we need. So it's time for the rest of the economy to start getting out there and getting things moving again.
Totally agree. I want to just mention to Joshua in Melbourne, if you have any follow up with this, or anybody has any follow up, you can always call my office 501-682-2144. And of course, you can always call Congressman Westerman's office. You want to give them your number just before we go to the next question?
Yeah, it's 202-225-3772. 202-225-3772.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Josh from the Queen asked, are they going to get the stimulus bill passed? I'll let you commented on that a little bit, but you got anything else you want to say on that?
Well, if you're referring to the bill that Pelosi introduced today, I would say that bill has absolutely zero chance of of passing and being signed into law. She'll pass it off the floor. It was strictly partisan. No Republican had any input in the bill. And I can't imagine a Republican that would want to take any credit for having input in that bill with the things that it had in it. Again, it's got essentially California voting laws federalized across the country. She's got funds in there to extend the unemployment through January of next year. That's the $600 match from the federal government. Taking out a lot of HIDE protections. It's just it's a liberal wish list that she's put in a partisan bill, and it's really not the time for that. And it's unfortunate that she's putting a bill out there. You know, she won't call members of Congress back, but she's sitting up there with her staff writing bills, and then you know, she's going to call us all back to vote on it. So it's
she's got her wish list out, and you know, she's following former Congressman Rahm Emanuel's advice of never letting a crisis go to waste. She is up there making her wish list, and that's what you're seeing reflected in that. Sounds like.
Yeah.
We're going to try to hit these quickly. Al on Facebook, the vast majority of people in Searcy aren't following social distancing guidelines. How do we deal with them? I'll take a stab at that. Look, I think most folks, by and large, hopefully have heard they've heard the guidance of the governor. They've seen the public service announcements, the federal ones and the state ones with the governor, and I've done some. Hopefully they are following this. There are some that aren't, and that is, we've got to, even though we're opening up slowly, we've got to continue to follow the distancing and the mask and what have you, because the duration of this pandemic and the severity, whether it's really bad or less bad or whatever, is all dependent on our individual actions. You asked, how do we deal with them? You know, I've heard of some people going up to others and saying, "Hey, you know, would you please distance?" Or, "Hey, would you please put on a mask?" There's some stores that have actually required it for people to come in. If it's a big event or something that should be that the health authorities should be notified of, then obviously you can do that. But generally speaking, we're depending on people to follow these rules. You want to comment on that, Bruce?
Yeah, at the end of the day, there's not going to be any hiding it. If people don't follow the rules and they go back to business as usual, we could see a spike in the numbers, and then you know, unfortunately, probably see some restrictions put back in place. So it's kind of that old tragedy of the commons idea that, you know, you're a single actor and your actions don't make any difference, but really everybody's actions make a difference. So we need to do the responsible thing, you know, follow the guidelines, and hopefully we can get the economy back up and running and get through this.
Amen. We've had several people comment they're opposed to vote by mail, as am I. I assume you're also opposed to vote by mail because of the potential for fraud on a wide. Obviously, we have absentee ballots. That's a different thing. There's an exception. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's when you start a new Congress, you start over with the numbering of bills. The majority party gets the first 10 numbers, and usually HR 1 through 10 are your highest priority bills. And the House has already passed this. It's going absolutely nowhere in the Senate, but it was that bill that would do vote by mail, same day voter registration, harvesting ballots, the one that the federal government would contribute to your election campaign funds. I think it was a rate of 6 to 1. Like for every dollar you made, the federal government would put in $6. It was just
I guess they would borrow that from China.
Maybe so, but we saw in the last election in California where they were counting votes 2 and 3 weeks after the election, votes they harvested on the night of the election, kept the polls open later, and we saw people win races and lose those races by a few votes weeks after the polls had closed, and they just counted votes till they got enough to win. It would also I forgot to say this, it would remove the voter ID laws across the country. So we have a voter ID law in Arkansas. It would do away with that. That's their idea of modernizing elections. There's a big race going on out in California tonight, and they're voting by mail, except they opened up a few precincts where it would be beneficial to their candidate. So the Constitution says that states are to carry out elections. We need to keep it that way, and we don't need the federal government telling us how to run local elections here in the state of Arkansas.
That's exactly right. Next one here, Harold from Traskwood would like to see immigration stopped until we get, this is what he said, until we get our people working again. We have, the borders may not be, they're not 100% closed, but they're substantially closed. Correct?
Yeah, we've seen a massive slowdown in illegal immigration under the current administration. There's been some restrictions put in place. We've also got guest worker programs that aren't really immigration. These are where guest workers come in and they do seasonal jobs. They go back. It's a legal program where you're tracking people that do that. And I think we need to continue these guest worker programs, but
they've been shut down as well, haven't they?
Not entirely. There's been some
because we had some
problems getting people
Arkansas.
Yeah, it's for ag work, for clearing right of ways, and it's jobs that people can't find employees to do these jobs, and it's been a little bit troublesome getting people over here. But when we're worried about the spread of a pandemic, it's not a bad thing to close your borders down and to screen people who are coming in.
That's right. But I will say that's right. I mean, there are reasons during a pandemic to do what's being done. I will just echo your point. There are jobs for guest workers that we in Arkansas, farmers and ranchers, have had a difficult time finding the people necessary to fill those jobs. Now, I was working with Congressman Rick Crawford and you and others, the Farm Bureau and others, to try to get people in Arkansas who don't have employment right now to fill some of those jobs. But in a normal situation, those guest workers that are tracked, they usually come every day every year for a particular season. Those workers are, when they're not here, these farmers, a lot of them shut down and don't have the capacity to produce what they need to be producing. So that is that's a different category.
Yeah, and it is unfortunate that even in where we're seeing unemployment, approaching 15%, possibly going to get to up to 20%, and you still got jobs that these aren't minimum wage jobs. These are $15, $20 an hour jobs that they just can't get people to do those jobs here. And it's jobs that have to be done, or your crops won't get in, or your right-of-ways won't get cleared, your trees won't get planted. There's a lot of jobs like that out there.
We got a ton of questions here. I'm going to try to speed up a little bit. We got just a couple more minutes. So Al asked several questions here. He said, I don't understand what exactly is China doing with our academics. Just in a nutshell, and this is just a broad brush, but they're doing several things. First of all, they're planning some of their academics in our institutions and passing information back to China illegally. That's one. Number two, they are getting money to professors in our institutions in exchange for information and technology. And there have been prosecutions here in the United States because of that. They also are paying, as I mentioned earlier, in some instances, they are paying professors in the United States to help to get those professors to help recruit people to either assist China or uh, to get technology to go work in China using their education, et cetera. So there are all sorts of different things that China's doing with regard to the academic community that we need to be very aware of. And there's a lot of good stuff written about China's long-term vision. Years and years and years ago, they've been planning to put as many foreign nationals in our academic institutions as they possibly can, and then have them come back to China, bringing their know-how, their technology, et cetera. So there's a lot of different stuff like that. Do you want to comment on that, Bruce?
Yeah, you covered that well. And it's not just our institutions of higher education. You're seeing it in things like environmental groups here in the US, that the Chinese government will pay these environmental groups. They'll set up offices in China, and then they turn a blind eye to what China's doing, while at the same time attacking and writing negative things about American companies. I was the chairman of an oversight committee in natural resources in the last Congress, and we wrote letters to several of these groups telling them they need to register as foreign agents if they're going to take money from the Chinese government and then try to influence US politics. An example is in the South China Sea. You saw the Chinese government go out on a coral reef and build an island. And these environmental groups were like crickets, never said a word about it. Yet you see our Navy doing testing and other things, and are trying to develop a base in Guam. And it's all held up in our courts by these people that claim to be environmentalists. I had a guy in the military tell me that the Chinese know our environmental laws better than we know our environmental laws.
Yeah.
While at the same time, I was out in the northern Marianas on the island of Saipan, like 45,000 people there. And the Chinese, and this is US territory, Chinese were building a multi-billion-dollar casino on a tiny island in the middle of the ocean. There's no way you could justify the economics of that, yet they were building it there to get that presence on US soil, and I think for a whole lot of other reasons. But you see them exerting that influence in a lot of different places, not just here in our country and on US soil, but around the world, building massive projects over in the Middle East to take water from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea. It's a project that people over there are really in favor of, but you look at it and it's the Chinese government designing it, building it, and financing it. And they'll get, those countries that participate will be indebted to them. Plus they'll be controlling their water supply and electrical generation. So it's a massive reach that they do around the world.
We got so many questions. So here's what we're going to do, folks. We're going to go through a couple more of these. And then all the questions we don't get to, we routinely answer those. We'll research the issue, get you an answer, and we'll either reply on Facebook or whatever mechanism you use. It looked like most of these are from Facebook, but we will respond to you and get you an answer. So if we don't get to your question, have no fear. This one, Bruce, you might want to answer this. I've heard so much about this. Why are dairies, this is Linda on Facebook, why are dairies having to pour out milk when you can't buy what you need at Walmart? I think the point she's making is, why are dairies pouring out milk when people need milk? You want to comment on that?
Yeah, we've had a huge disruption to our food supply chain. I've been on calls with the National Restaurant Association and other groups, and I didn't know this, but the U.S. had just gotten to a mark where there was more food consumed in restaurants than there were in that was purchased out of the grocery stores. So there's a different kind of packaging and processing that goes into supplying foods for restaurants versus supplying foods for grocery stores. Well, now everybody's going to the grocery store and buying stuff. You're seeing processing plants close down. You got a huge demand for the product, but you've not got the capacity in the processing facilities to get those products into the marketplace. While on the other side, the suppliers to those processing facilities, whether it's beef cattle or pork or dairy, they're seeing extremely low prices because there's not capacity for the processors to handle their product coming from the farm. So we've seen vegetables buried in pits. We've seen milk dumped out. We've seen thousands of head of hogs just euthanized and buried because of this massive change and disruption to the food supply chain. And it's it's another area that we're going to have to take a serious look at in this country. And hopefully that's going to start stabilizing soon. But you had issues like in Iowa with a pork producing facility where the local officials were telling the employees not to go to work, and they had to close it down because they could only get like 200 people there for a shift, and it took 1,000 people to operate the facility.
You make a good point. I think the best way to describe it is there are numerous steps involved in getting a raw food product ready for market. And if one of those steps can't be accomplished because of this disruption you described, that food can't go to market. And I think, milk, you can't just take the buckets of milk and just pour them, have people come up with their own bottles and fill it up. It's got to be pasteurized. It's got to go through that process to make sure it's safe for consumption. I think that's a big part of what you're talking about there. We're going to go to one more question here, and again, we'll get to the others. And I know Al, you had several here, and we'll get back with you as well. Leslie on Facebook talks about 70% of Americans can't afford American made because it costs too much. How do you lower the cost for American goods? I'll just quickly say there are other opportunities other than China to make some of the things that maybe Americans don't want to make. Very simple, basic products. Our manufacturing strength in this country is more sophisticated, higher end manufacturing, and we do a lot of it. We want more of it, but we do a lot of it. And certainly the way Chinese wages and the Chinese workers are treated, that's not going to happen here, thank the Lord. And so in certain situations, we're never going to be as cheap as they are. But there are ways to do more of it, more manufacturing here. And if we're not going to do it here because those aren't the jobs that Americans are attracted to, or the price can't get low enough, then there are other places in the world other than China to do that sort of business. That's a couple of points. Another point is manufacturing. We've already made things better for manufacturing with the tax reform that the president advocated for and you voted for. First big tax reform since 1986. It's a big deal. That has helped. No question that has helped. Regulatory reform has helped. Some of the new trade agreements that we've had and trade deals that we've had, that has helped. So there's a number of different things. We've got to continue to focus on workforce training in the STEM fields, because we love all jobs, but if we have a choice, we want the long-term, good paying, more sophisticated jobs of the future if we have our choice, and we've got to make sure our workers are prepared for that. So there's a lot of different things to go into getting more manufacturing, having cheaper manufacturing, being more efficient. One of the big strengths we've got is there's no one better than the American worker. No one more productive than the American worker. So there are a lot of different factors there, but we have done better and we can continue to do better. But regardless, there are a lot of other options besides China. And some of those other options are our allies. And so Bruce, you want to, anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, those are good points. That was a good question, and I think that making stuff here and being able to afford stuff that's made here kind of go hand in hand, because when you start talking about the high tech world of manufacturing now, you're talking about jobs where people have more income, but that comes back to affect things like education and the way we prepare people for the workforce and the type of things that we manufacture here. And there's a bright future ahead with all the innovation and the products that we develop here to be able to make those products here as well. But we got to get the workforce uh, in place that can operate these factories, that can make this stuff in a high volume, low cost environment where we can compete. You have to ask yourself, how can you make something on the other side of the world and ship it here for much less than you can make it here? And it tells you that somebody's manipulating something either with resources, with labor, or with both. And most of the time, it's with both. And where does that get us at the end of the day? What happens when we don't make anything here and we're dependent on somebody else for all of our goods? They control the market then, and then they can charge whatever price they want to charge when they control the market. We're seeing that not just in pharmaceuticals and PPE like we've seen lately, but things like rail cars.
Yeah.
Things you wouldn't imagine that aren't made in the United States anymore. They're made overseas.
Well, look, I appreciate you, Bruce. We had a bunch more questions that we couldn't get to, and we will get to those folks. We will respond to you. We'll write up a response. I'll work with staff tomorrow and we'll work on that. Appreciate all of y'all joining. Really appreciate you, Bruce. You do an awesome job for Arkansas, for the 4th District. And I just want to say again, we're going to continue to do these 2 nights. We've got 2 this week on Thursday night, 2 nights, not tonight, tomorrow, next night. On Thursday night, 6 o'clock, we're going to have the CEO, administrator of Children's Hospital, of Mercy in Northwest Arkansas, of Ashley County, the hospital there, Philip Gilmore. We're going to have the Heart Hospital represented, Baptist here in Little Rock, and St. Bernard's in Jonesboro. We're going to have a lot of folks working in these hospitals, leading these hospitals, to talk about what's going on there. And that'll be Thursday night at 6. And we'll be getting some information out on that. But we appreciate you, Bruce. If you need Bruce for anything, he gave you the number there, and call him. He's a great guy. I hope if you ever get a chance to meet him, I hope you viewers will take that opportunity. He's just a great servant for us here in Arkansas. And of course, you can call my number, 501-682-2144, if we can help you. God bless y'all. Be safe. Let's get things opened up, but let's follow the guidance. Let's use common sense. Let's take care of our health and our families. God bless y'all. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Governor Griffin. It's good to be with you. Thank you for the job that you do. And westerman.house.gov, 202-225-3772. It's a great thing you're doing here, Tim. Appreciate all of your work, and keep it up. God bless everyone. Have a good night.
Thank y'all. Good night.